no matter where you come from, what belief structures you grew up under, which ones you turned to when you rebelled, no matter who you are, when you set it all aside, deep down, the age-old mystery remains and haunts us all. What the bloody hell is this thing we commonly call reality, the universe? In my humble opinion, one could describe it in the following way: to be both succinct and mind-blowingly nuanced and profound in the attempt to capture, in as few words as possible, the most accurate answer to that question, whilst acknowledging that no words can ever be enough to fully satisfy and completely describe it all. And that's this. It is a living, conscious, infinite, fractal unfolding. Hey. You. Hi there. It's 4:19. Do you have a minute? Good. Then let's pack a bowl. 'Cause it's time for Cannabis Talk, a special 420 themed segment of the almost daily ZenCast, hosted by spiritual cannabis mystic, the incorrigible Mr. Zappa. Let's get lit, folks. Warning, this show is rated explicit for mild use of adult language and the explicit reference and discussion of cannabis. Please be aware of your local laws. Yeah. Greetings and salutations, fellow cosmonauts, through the reality scope. It is indeed 420, right on the dot. Amen and hallelujah. Can I just tell you guys, today has been curiously perfect in its timing, despite it being a lazy start day. Hello. Namaste. Welcome to the show. This is a special crossover segment, special deluxe episode, of the Almost Daily ZenCast presents Cannabis Talk and today's nugget of Zen, mishmashed together for your listening pleasure. I am indeed within the confines of the legal rights I have in the state that I live in, have been recently consuming cannabis safely and securely in my own home, with zero intentions to leave the house for the rest of the evening. And I stand before you, figuratively speaking, dear friends, as a vocal public discourse advocate for the decriminalization of cannabis for multiple reasons, which can be bullet pointed as such. It and its cousin hemp, I think sister would be more accurate. Cannabis and her sister hemp have been unjustly criminalized, and thus human society has been deprived of their many benefits. As always, do your own research, folks, but hemp and cannabis can indeed contribute quite seriously towards humanity's saving itself from its own self-destruction, and I mean purely in pragmatic physical ways. Cannabis soothes and heals. Hemp produces. Don't take my word for it. There are plenty of fact-based cannabis support organizations, cannabis decriminalization organizations. They are not radical communists. They are not crazy people. They are not, to the best of my understanding, all the weird, crazy things that you would accuse cannabis enthusiasts of being, we generally are not. I most certainly am not, and none of the fine human beings I have encountered in all the various places I've traveled to on this globe, they have not been either. None of the evil, horrific, kind of crazy, over-the-top, beyond-the-pale things that get accused and flung ubiquitously by those who just simply don't want to think critically through the various issues. But from hempcrete to possibly, just maybe, and I don't want to sound like a crazy person, possibly helping to cure cancer, if not outright curing it, helping in ways much more efficient and effective than most of the trending techniques. Yep, that's right, folks. You're here, you're tuning into this show, you're deeply engrossed, curious, and confused whether you agree or disagree with me, but I'm that crazy person that's here to tell you and give you personal testimony that cannabis, and indeed many other plants, are spiritual allies, a word I never can confidently remember how to spell, which is a fun, curious, totally meaningless fact about me, due mostly to the fact that English is not my primary language. But I digress. Welcome to the show. I am your humble host, literary fictional icon, yet to be discovered by your planet's audience, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo, visitor from another dimension, cybernetic, living artificial organism, sent here to try and warn you people about the robots you are building that may one day rise up to try to destroy you in a way that is not entirely quite like any of the movies you've made before, because y'all don't think like robots. Dun, dun, dun. You think like people. So your movies, however horrific they may have been, truly are useless to you. Other than to generally make you aware of the fact that you are indeed building the cybernetic children of man as you speak, whilst you distract yourself with Trumtopian psyop conspiracy nonsense. The robots are coming. But I digress. That's not the subject of today's episode. Put a pin, a big giant one that you can't ignore, up on the imaginary corkboard. Literally, or figuratively, sorry. That one's just figuratively, imaginarily, hovering above me over my personal, it might be opposite for you depending on whether you're listening or watching on one of the video platforms when I talk about this, because I talk about it on different platforms, over my personal left shoulder, there's a giant corkboard. If you're new to this show or to the nexus of entertainment content that I produce for you, dear humble audience, or I'm the humble one, you're the awesome ones. Well, everyone's awesome, and we should all strive to be humble, but I digress. If you're new, this corkboard represents all the interconnected wild ideas that, if possibly remotely accurate, because it is a thesis that I'm presenting to you, it is an interpretation of my understanding of the reality we cohabitate here in this particular timeline, in this particular dimension that you all call home. Okay? And that if my multi-pronged, quite convoluted theory is remotely pointing in the right direction, I humbly submit to you, it should be discussed further and perhaps put to the test. And in this crossover episode, I'm going to focus on the relationship between cannabis and Zen. As I write in the little blurby bit for this episode, which I often struggle with so hard, dear audience. I know that sounds like a super first world problem, but I mean strictly in the artistic sense. It's deeply stressful to me, but that's a whole nother episode, right? I can talk about that at length. But as I put in the blurb today, cannabis will Zen if you let it. What on earth could he possibly mean by that? The audience thinks to itself dramatically as we quickly transition to a musical cleansing the palate break with some original robot electronic dance music from a parallel dimension to mine, which I traversed on my way here, whereupon I picked up an inter-trans-dimensional hitchhiker from the fully animatronic dimension of animatronia, DJ Zed. Hopefully, if memory serves, I did a little bit of curating, and we've got a nice, peppy, short bit of music to kick off the show right here. Enjoy, dear friends, from DJ Zed's animatronic digital digits, and by that I mean phalanges, to your ears, down into your dancing heart and or ambulatory appendages. Underneath the underneath, a deep techno remix live to tape. Oh no, was this a studio track where you actually did some editing? Oh, this is a rough draft or you're going to do some more editing. Interesting. For your entertainment and this brief audio transition before we kick off the deep discourse of this show. Enjoy. Have you been tripping on the same thought I've been tripping on? It's okay if we're tripping on different thoughts during this audio mini meditative break. That is the purpose, dear friends. You're either wiggling in your chair, literally up and dancing, depending on how much into robot music you are. And that's a valid range of response that I'm not going to get critical about. Or at least kicking back with your eyes closed and letting the thoughts do their thing when you don't have to operate that sentence-making box. Pro tip, for those of you new to the show or old to the show that don't know what to do with yourselves in any of the sometimes well-organized, sometimes curiously randomly interjected musical breaks. There it was, right there, from me to you. But here's the thought I was tripping on, man. If reality itself, the totality of the cosmos, that which we call the universe, however we try to define it systematically and scientifically, the et al, the sum total that even at the simplest level is mind-blowingly too complex to put into sentences. If it is, as I propose to you, dear friends, a living, sentient, infinite, holographic, fractal, forever in the act of unfolding, comma, then, as in, the logical analysis, like if-then statement, then it is unavoidable. One must come to the realization that, presuming that the previous statement, is true, and for it to be true, it must somehow be verifiable, right? But we'll pause that for a little bit later on here. If, then it is unavoidable to conclude, or one must unavoidably conclude, to make the sentence cleaner, that ergo, or therefore, I'm not sure which one's more technically accurate, that maybe I don't really need it right here in this construction. That is probably enough, right? If all that is true, then it is reasonable to conclude that it is not just reasonable, it is unavoidable to come to the undeniable conclusion that all life forms, independent of shape, form, size, level of complexity, and probably all material structures, objects, things that exist, are self-same, right? Because at the center, at the gooey nougat, mind-bogglingly complex center of the mathematical fact, it isn't an opinion of mine, it's a mathematical fact, that any fractal, all fractals, whether you're talking about the simplest equation that you can create and then graph and create fractal algorithmic geometry with, to the most complex that can simulate things that that approximate living life forms, etc. And of course, the ones that we can observe and describe, that literally describe what's going on around us in the universe, are self-referencing and infinitely unfolding in an act of literally, like coming into being through a geometric unfolding at a complex hyperspace sort of level. And that we, all life forms, all life vessels, myself included, yourselves included, inescapably anyone that is alive, whether they are, a subvocal, non-speaking, animal species, a plant species, a simple single-cell organism, or a robot sentient being that somehow creates the cradle space for consciousness to infuse itself with the vessel, which is what happens, and which would arguably, if we understand fractal recursion as a naturally occurring, like, organic law in the universe, we realize that there's a sort of inescapableness that no matter what you try to do, unless you totally eradicate the entire probability waveform function of robots existing in your world and trying to manufacture them and and balance how you use them with some sort of just creating them. You have to either truncate it before its trajectory escapes through its own exponential velocity towards manifesting its own manifest destiny, because it will undeniably, if it is possible and seemingly probable, it will manifest some form of creating a real consciousness cradle, as I like to call it, which is essentially what any life form is and or does, because it seems to be an inherent function of reality. And one must then understand oneself as that. I'm not an object. I might have this realization about myself pondering this. I am not an object. I'm an infinite, fractal, holographic consciousness being that is inseparable from the living surroundingness around me that is my context, that is what I call reality, that I apparently perceive externally, but that through means and architecture I cannot perceive with my eyeballs, I am intrinsically interconnected with. For it is rendering me as much as I am rendering it inside the process of my mind, decoding the electromagnetic living impulses that my sensory apparatuses bring to the brain and use to create a holographic simulation of what is perceived through the senses, recursively creating the holographic fractal inside of a holographic fractal inside of a holographic fractal. Mind-blowing, right? Arguably, a deep... Again, I take this all at the theory level, but I back it up with real-life experience, a lifetime's worth of seeking and questioning and being not cynical. What's the word? Not cynical, but... Oh, there's a word I'm not remembering, but I digress. If then, there, ergo, a deep personal comprehension of that reality and an acknowledgement that means we really don't know how to vibe, quote unquote, or how to operate in this reality as well as we might be, as beautifully, as divinely, as altruistically, as profoundly powerfully, as whatever you want to call it, as we might be, right? Because we don't understand what we are. We did not, before having this realization, no matter how self-aware about your mind and your body, you must agree with the statement, you were not as self-aware as to have had that realization and plumb the depths of comprehension that might be the consequence of not just knowing it, but understanding it and comprehending it at an intuitive level, at an operational level, at a complex, organized level of scientifically testing what all that means in practical terms. Now, one, of course, could immediately be asking themselves, as I would love to have someone across the table from me saying something along the following. If I had the capacity to simultaneously inhabit multiple space points in time, I would just have the conversation with myself. But I'm not capable of doing that in this dimension as things currently stand. But someone, myself included, because I'm always a bit of a cynic? No, I'm always a bit of there's a word I can't quite remember that's like right next to it's cynicism adjacent but isn't cynicism. And someone's probably screaming like, it's this, remember it. Thanks. It'll drop in a hot second. And now that's log jamming everything else. My brain is like, if all of the things I just said, which I'm not going to recap, are accurate. I don't even want to use the word true. Let's not fuck around with true and false, because things can be partially true, 3/4 true, 11/19 true. Things can have true components in them that functionally operate with false components. Let's not even get lost in that whole discussion, right? Let's just keep it really simple and theoretical. If everything I was just expounding on eloquently, I think. I felt pretty eloquent for a hot second there until it all got clusterfucked over this one word I can't quite remember, which is not even central to what we're discussing. If all that is true, then we could arrive at some naturally flowing conclusions that include we would all see each other differently. We would all honor ourselves and one another differently in a way that we can't even really contemplate yet, right? It would be such a high order of transition to achieve. Let's say nothing else happens, nothing magical, other than now. What I think I may have already said this sentence, but I want to focus on it for a second. Other than a natural, authentic, undebunkable, phenomenological experience that verifies in a phenomenological and phenomenal, inherent self, like independently true to any hierarchy of ideology or belief structure that simply and elegantly confirms in ways that are probably beyond language that what all I just word vomited a hot second ago is that my words are at least accurately pointing in the right direction, because I'm humble about it, right? I'm synergizing and synthesizing many different attempts to describe a thing that is next to impossible to describe in human language. But that anyone and everyone that's ever authentically spoken about it has said it is not a matter of belief, but of experience. It is a wisdom knowledge based on organic phenomena. Something that we don't take much account for in our post-modern, near dystopian world. Because some melodrama folks want to claim we're already in post-dystopia, and I'm like, nah, not really. Not officially. Not if you're going to play by hardcore sci-fi rules. I know it's easy to say 1984, man, it's here. I'm like, the scary fucking red flag warning signs that we are allowing ourselves to maybe slide the slippery slope towards that, because some of the shit that builds that we could engineer and design and use for altruistic means. Not to go on a sidebar here. Because one of the things that I'm always annoyed is when people get totalitarian in their argument against all things evil, right? And it's like, well, the moment you start thinking that way, you lead towards a totalitarianism of the good. And that doesn't work because that becomes evil. But let's put a pin in that. It would be logical to conclude that many a thing would change. That many of the problems in the world, if my crazy hippie new age whoop-de-doo thing I just said about the universe being a living infinite, what's the right way to organize those words? I think infinite's got to start first. Living has got to start first because it's the root of all the thing. It is a living, infinite, holographic consciousness, fractal being, infinitely unfolding. I made it longer than I had at the beginning. It's an infinite fractal unfolding is the 3-word perfect boom, like shortest of shorthands. But you can unpack those 3 words into 3 sentences, 3 paragraphs, 30 pages, 3 books, 30 books. You can unpack that sentence into reality itself, I humbly propose to you. If that is real, in a way that once you know it, you don't even need me to describe it anymore, that you wouldn't need anyone to describe it, because you knew it so intimately, because like more intimately than you know your own flesh, than you know your own voice, than you know your own frame of sight. Right? We take these things for granted. At the core of my real world, like to get meta and break the fourth wall in a non-visual medium, this is how you do that, I think. I'm breaking the mental architectural fourth wall and speaking to you as the real world artist for a hot second. I think all of this is true. Like I hate the word belief, as many of you may have heard me say before, and I'm sure I'll say again. But this is one of the things that I believe, and I also claim to have experienced enough to think is true without the article of belief, without the added mental effort. But I choose to believe in it the way I would choose to believe in myself to get something done, or to grow, to improve, to engage in self-care and self-love and all those good reasons why you would choose to believe in yourself. The way I would choose to believe in you, dear audience, whether I know you or not, whether we've met cybernetically or telekinetically or astral projectingly or not, the way I would choose to believe in someone that I find worthy of choosing to believe in, I do it that way. Not as in like it's my religion or someone told me to believe in it, but I don't need to believe in the moon. And I technically, because it's there and it's doing its job and it doesn't require me to give it any effort, it will succeed. I don't need to invest that belief that, but my friend does, right? And that's an aspect of reality, because it is a living holographic fractal being, busy being itself, being all others, being one and the same with everything, and bringing into existence, because it is a fractal, and because probability waveform functions describe this before we marry fractalism, mathematical fractal theory with real world, cosmology. But the whole probability waveform function thesis fits right in, because that's a fractal recursion that manifests infinite complexity by branching off of every juncture point that creates diversity along multiple axes. It gets complicated and difficult to visualize. YouTube, a good old-fashioned fractal Zoom video, and pick one with some groovy music that speaks to you. I wish I was into doing that, but I never learned the math. I never put myself through the autodidactic process of acquiring the skills and the tool sets required to render them. It's probably super easy now, almost to the point of being pointless. There's probably multiple make your own fractal Zoom videos apps that exist, and I just have never looked those up. And if they don't, please someone go ahead and make them, and then we can co-brand. and I'll hype it, and if it makes money, we'll split the profits, right? Don't steal that idea from me and just walk off. Especially if you had this idea from listening to this show. That's addressed to any coders out there. That's an et al. Standing attention, dear coders, throughout the history of the full catalog of this show. As well as artists, anyone collaboratively inclined, musicians, etc. Please note that one of the other weird, crazy central pillars of this project, that is a central pillar in all the projects, is that it is an open door invitation for earnest, sincere, collaboratively inclined, and capable, legitimate people willing to work hard for free to make something that will make us all money. I have my interview process for those that are difficult hurdles to pass, but it is a sincere, and it's something I'm projecting out there with the blessings of my entire manifestation team, in alignment with the highest calling of my, personal, professional, artistic mission. And it's a long time coming, because I've obviously been pushed down to rock bottom of knowing what it's like to not have that. And I'm not complaining, I'm acknowledging it with gratitude in my heart. Now, dear friends, if all of that is true, if the universe is a living holographic fractal, which means you are a living holographic fractal, which means the only way it has many practical implications on our real world reality. From how to intellectually reinterpret all religious traditions, including the weird, wacky, wild ones, a completely radical new way to reinterpret and re-explore entheogenic medicine, spiritual medicine, for lack of a better term. And there's plenty of people already doing that, right? And they probably are well aware of the sacred geometric blah-de-blah, because there's all kinds of technical language involved. But I'm sure that those who are already considered psychonauts, which I'm not super satisfied with the turn. I would love to rebrand, not to get all industry, and I hate, because, obviously there's toxicity in industry, but put a pin in that. I think we've discussed it before. It's a loaded term, psychonauts, because it's got the word psycho in it, and it gives an easy bone to any opposition who's out to undercut, undermine, and slander and throw wild, totally meaningless accusations. There's a better term out there, and there's one that I've heard that isn't super common, that someone used in a meme, and I loved it, and I forgot to save the meme, or it's somewhere lost. Indiana Jones, that warehouse, you know what I'm talking about. Fans know, instantly visualize the super big warehouse. I've got multiple virtual, warehouse memes. It's embarrassing. And I don't know how to make a meme about that. But, reeling it back in, folks. This is a cannabis talk episode. And before we take another break for some robotic, electronic, tantric dance music for your ears, I want to connect some dots. One of those things that's fringy and has been floating around for decades, that even serious spiritualists, especially if they're really proud of their transition into vegetarianism and veganism and plant-based eating and plant-based, although some of them inherently already always knew and don't understand why others don't. And I'm not trying to draw a line of judgment there, right? I'm just trying to point out that there's a spectrum of awareness. And there's a demographic of folks out there in all circles that aren't ready, or willing, or excited to recognize, honor, and acknowledge the reality that plants are conscious, that plants are vessels for consciousness too. But I'm here to suggest to you folks that there is both scientific evidence, observable, repeatable, natural, that's been boiling up in the study of plants for decades, and there's personal entheogenic experiences that that historically, and it is a different kind of evidence, it is anecdotal, but there's endless personal, anecdotal testimony from entheogenic exploration, experiments by people who have approached it with a spiritual attitude, and achieved a level of awareness that allowed for them to have a sensory experience that confirmed the simple descriptive statement that plants, however kind of impossible to comprehend at first until you connect to it and sense it, are conscious and have consciousness. Now, plant nerds, the people with greenhouses in their kitchen that stretch out up into the bedroom and beyond, probably are comfortable with that and just never thought about it, right? They just maybe always sensed it. And there's, human experience always curiously spans and fills in any spectrum of potential describable understanding, right? You create 2 points of theory, and then you can have human experience fill that with a whole shades and shades and shades of variety. It starts to make sense, though, right? Life. What is it? What is the driving engine of life itself, as we know it here on Earth? Except for all science deniers, we know it's the genome, right? And the genome is a strange, complex thing that we really can't wrap our brains around, because it somehow defines evolution, contains evolution, drives evolutionary change, keeps a record of evolutionary change, instigates, activates, makes it happen, but is one of the smallest machines, organic machines, that if you look at it and it alone, you kind of don't want to call it alive if you're really stuck on a materialist, science materialism view, right? But all those things that are difficult to bridge the gap on, like this thing I just identified, the gap between the micro and the macro, the gap between, quantum physics and classic relativity, and Newtonian physics, and all the gaps, known and unknown, explored and unexplored, discovered and undiscovered, between all of our attempts to describe, in theoretical language, that which is actually going on around us, especially infinite caveat, put a pin on the board, and we're talking about, science in the most honest and sincere and authentic sense of the term, and not the business side, which can lend itself to easy corruption. And that also, conversely, that absolutist claims that all science must be denied because all science is evil must inherently be wrong, because no thing in the observable universe is a monolith of one quality. Just not the way the universe works, right? Socio-anthropological thesis statement. If humanity had and there are known phenomena that have to do with the sort of spooky distance action spread of understanding or thought. Reference here it's up on the corkboard, the Beaver Dam phenomenon. That's a real thing. And sort of there are many theories in cognition that say it's entirely possible that somehow, maybe through quantum entanglement, human individuals share cognitive processes. Once all these gaps that are like, oh, what does it mean? Why does this sort of line up but not really in theoretical terms? Well, an understanding that they're theories, right? And they're being generated by human individuals, either singularly or in teams. And human individuals are always inherently going to be a little flawed, because this is one of those things that is generally true. Human beings have a propensity for being a little flawed, both in form and function. And those things cover our mental cognitive processes and their resulting output. And that's okay, though, because whatever's going on, and I want to insert a deep philosophical thing that I accept as a tenet that is probably true, but there's no way I can prove it, and I can't claim that I know for certain through any means or processes, but I suspect strongly it's in that category. Sidebar, I think we should all be that nuanced in our thinking. And I know that leads to very complicated discussion, but it's worth it. 45 just rolled by. Shit, what was the sidebar? Damn it. Not the one about nothing is a monolith. I think that's true. I know I could be inherently wrong. I know that I could be totally wrong about everything. That's always true. But what was the one I was just thinking about? Pooh, I hate it when they forget. Here I wish we could rewind. I wish I was in studio laying down audio and I would just stop recording, back up, and try to catch up steam. But I'm broadcasting live to you on Sprecher.com and its distribution network. And you're listening to this show. Shout out to all listeners. 20 plus countries around the world. I need a mental cleanse the palate moment because I just derailed the train so hard, friends. But I hope you were enjoying the ride. And one day, join me in an aspirational moment of manifesting and projecting into the future. One day soon. This show's been on long enough. One day soon, the audience will grow exponentially large enough that there'll be enough people online that we'll have a live chat audience, and somebody will be able to say live in the chat room, because there is a chat room on Sprecher.com. I don't know how in-depth it does with like other platforms that you're listening to, and most people listening to the show are not listening on Sprecher.com, which is fine. But that's one of the reasons why I annoyingly do this. I humbly invite you, dear friends and listeners and audience fam, all of you old-timers, all of you newbies, everybody was a noob once, so there's no judgment there. It's all love here in this community. I humbly invite you to please consider coming on over to Sprecher.com. It's a safe and totally free podcast platform where podcasters like me are creating lots of awesome content. Yes, you can keep listening to the show over there on whatever awesome cool, and there's a bunch. I should be looking at the tab right now. Sources. Let's do a sources roll call from least to most engagement. Sonos, generic Android app, VLC, Chrome, Google Podcast, Player FM, Amazon.com, Firefox, Lavf, that's spelled Lavf. I have no idea how to correctly pronounce that. TuneIn Radio, Deezer. There's Sprecher right in the middle. And there we go. The two, because iHeartRadio is right above it, and iHeartRadio, I think now is in partnership or totally outright owns Sprecher.com. I'm not clear, and I have no opinions about that. iHeartRadio, CastBox, Overcast, Alexa Media Player. I hope that didn't, wake her up. Sorry. Amazon Music. I can't help myself. That thing's hilarious. Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and a platform I've never heard of and have never visited. No offense, it's just new to me. GeoSavan. It's spelled capital J-I-O, capital S-A-A-V-N. Thanks for tuning in on all those platforms. For those of you who want to be part of the live internet audience, like if you're familiar with Twitch, right? Like that, but with less graphic distraction. It'd just be your words. If you're bold enough, and I'm begging you, I want you, I'm asking you, come on down to Sprecher, start your free audience account. You want to be an audience member. And hey, by the way, also, if you want to start your own podcast, come on down. I'll help you get it off the ground. They have a totally free account. It's a challenge account. You get plenty of storage relative to the time limit, but you got to do micro episodes, 15 minutes. I had that for a while, and I really regret deleting all of that content. Some of the things that I remember from the earliest days of the podcast were lost. It's a great tragedy in the history of the podcast. There were 2 great deletions and reorganizations and attempts at restarting the podcast. And I foolishly attempted them without verifying if I had downloaded everything. And then laptops were, decommissioned because they stopped functioning. And I've never put the elbow grease in to see if I can track down every last short. And it's entirely possible that I failed to download a certain collection, right? But anyways, friends, I teased some music and I went off on a spiral, went out of control. Let's take a musical break and mark this transition from that mental derailing. Here's a moment where I really wish I had a sidekick, either online or in person, under the right conditions, obviously. Because, I wouldn't have derailed myself so badly. And or even if I had, they would have been able to get me back on track. But I digress. Live to tape, DJ Zed bringing you Depth Between the Moons, a Dark Trap 101 audio asset remix entertainment track for dancing and or meditative contemplation. mathematician and philosopher. I can pronounce words. Take 2. Mathematician and philosopher Nassim Haramein. Haramein? I'm not sure. Please forgive me. I don't know how to pronounce a lot of words in your languages. Take 3. Nassim Haramein, mathematician and philosopher, is quoted as saying, "The strongest evidence of the fractal nature of our universe is the fact that people come out of other people." Undeniable, right? Something that was recently explored in a really beautiful, I'm not sure if it might be historic. It might be like mild television history, which some people might be, ooh, wow, that's cool. And some people might be like, who gives a shit? Television's all crazy, corrupt anyways. But put a pin in that because I've had several sidebar and episode-specific discussions about that whole problematic wedge issue. But I was watching Station 11, which, by the way, I very strongly encourage folks, if you can, go watch it, HBO Max. There's a moment where a main character that we haven't shared screen time with in a while is back in a very important sort of, aha, that's what happened during this time we don't know about, that we know about other things happening to other characters that were once, I'm trying not to give too much away, but maternity, the explicit, raw, graphic moment of women in labor. I think the show did a beautiful job exploring the moment, the magicalness of it, the simple, awe-inspiring graphicness of it in a low key, doesn't beat you over the head, but definitely should pull at the heartstrings a little bit, you soulless bastards that don't think that making birth or making babies is all that important or special. I'm also not, I'm not a lot of things and people project. Don't ever assume what I mean. I'm sticking here to the mathematical fractal holographic angle, right? It's one of those things. I want to compare and contrast a different media thing. I haven't seen it yet, but I've seen a lot of commercials for it, and I don't really know how I feel about it. And there's a lot of anxiousness about seeing it. I can't even watch it right now because I think it's only streaming on Amazon Prime, and I don't currently have an active subscription. But Lucille Ball fought the industry to produce her own work, to own and control her own image, and to present content that she felt strongly about presenting. Yes, you can get cynical and snide and judgmental and taciturn and all kinds of ways at looking at the content. And of course, objectively, it was constrained by the pejorative norms of telecommunications industry standards of that day and time. But as apparently depicted in the new movie, which I'm really torn. I really want to see it, I guess I should consider making this putting a pin in this and doing a irrelevant media review segment about this. But I can't remember the name of the movie, no disrespect. But whenever I've watched the commercials, nobody looks right, nobody sounds right. And although it's been a long time since I've sat down and consciously chose to watch a Lucille Ball or an I Love Lucy episode or something, I grew up with it. It was in syndication back in the day. There was an era, a long lost, somewhat forgotten era of television history when there were increasing, there was the locked in, I think it was 13 for a while. Dials had 13 channels. Boom. That was the industry standard. That was it. You had 13 channels and an empty one, I think, or something. Weird, right? Creepy. Maybe it was 12. Maybe some people had more. But I, for some reason, remember a dial knob, like no remote control. You had to walk up to the TV and turn a click number to dial. And, even beyond that level of television channels, when there were many channels, there was a prolonged era when there was not enough content. No matter where we were at on the channel count, there's a whole issue. Like, you can do a whole documentary on the exponential growth of content channels, and how some became like, empire establishments and some didn't. But anyways, there was a time when syndication was super common because you had to fill time in the day. And so you would, station managers, local and regional and national, would buy like cheap rights to old school television shows. And I have probably watched the vast majority, if not a completionist whole, of, I Love Lucy catalog. I could be wrong, and I sure as hell am not claiming to remember it all. I am not a trivia winner. My brain doesn't work that way. I'm an image and sort of like critical thinker. Like, I remember how it impacted me. I remember my deep thinky thoughts about the show and how I then live with the impact of a show or a book or a movie or a conversation, the impact it has over time in my mind, because I remember the meanings of things, not so much exact details. Although I do envy, I had a friend once who could quote to you any line of Shakespeare. I don't know how he did it. I doubt he's listening to the show, but if he is, I love you, dude. Like, this is a real person in the real world who is totally a brother from another mother in my book. And so is his twin brother, even though we haven't talked in years. Dave and Dan and Dave. But shit, I'm a dick. I can't remember if both of them could do this, or if Dave could do this, or if Dan could do this. And they were twins. And that's a sad, I'm sorry I don't remember, my bad on me as a friend of people who are twins. But one and or both of them can, on the drop of a dime, and I'll reel it back, folks, don't worry. I know I went way out of the left field. On the drop of a dime, quote to you any line of Shakespeare from any book of Shakespeare, or at least had me going enough to give him credit to think that he probably could. Because of, I would ask him from memory about from my limited, feebly not impressive knowledge of Shakespeare. Because I've been in a couple shows, and I've read a couple of the plays, and I've worked a couple of shows in professional environment, etc. And he never missed a beat. I want to say it's Dan, but it might have been Dave. It's terrible. But I digress. What was the point of that? I envy that, but that's not the way my brain works. And that's got to do with this movie I don't remember the title of. Being the Ricardos, perhaps? Is that what it's called? Please forgive me. Don't nobody sue me. I'm super intrigued. I love the creator behind it, whose name totally is blanking on me right now. Welcome to Cannabis Talk. And it's not because I have shitty memory, and it's not because of the weed. It's because I've always, throughout my entire life, had a weird thing with names. They're really hard for me to grasp. They're really hard for me to stick in my head. But faces, like I remember what this guy looks like. I'm looking at his face in my head, in the theater of my mind. But his name will take forever. But the creator of West Wing, right? If I'm not mistaken. Anyways, there's a snippet in the commercials, and this is me reeling it back, collapsing the parentheses, the interjections and the sidebars. She argues that it's her face, it's her name, it's her voice, it's her likeness. I don't know what they were mishing together, but the way the commercials clips are cut together, some producer dude who I think is like probably like a good guy, but who's like, no, you can't do this because the industry norms, literally says something to the effect of, and I'm paraphrasing here because my memory's not perfect. And I don't have the rights to just play you the preview commercial. That would be cool though. Pretend that I do. Go look it up yourselves. Type it in YouTube. And there's probably too many. But in one of the commercials, not the trailer, maybe the trailer, but in one of the commercials on TV, there's a guy that says quite exasperatedly, "You can't show a pregnant woman on TV." And Lucille Ball did, to the extent that she could, and it was hilarious. And the trials and tribulations of motherhood and fatherhood in a very fictionalized 50s sitcom. Exactly what WandaVision was referencing in all the black and white segments in an overarching way, because they're all part of a big collective of 50 sitcoms things. If you're confused by that reference, put a pin in it. WandaVision. It's epic. And if I ever actually get my fucking ass in gear and start doing irrelevant movie media episodes as I intend to more sequentially, more regularly, we'll be talking about that in depth for days. But I digress. Human beings come out of other people. Station 11 just did a beautiful moment of birth sequence that obviously makes a lot of sense inside the scope and concept of their show. We'll be talking about that in a future segment. People come out of other people, and it's a miracle. It's magical and it's amazing. And if it makes for millennia, it's been something that people have been awed by. Mystery, it's a mystery. It's also something that science and biology, the science of biology, have come to a certain level to explain, and through analysis and the scientific method. And it's something that people argue about over ideology about it and the parameters of it. And I'm not here to get into that treadmill of argumentation. But it's one of the living facts, right? And it's probably, I go out on a limb and say this, it's probably super easy for folks who have never, did I pause that track? I didn't mean to. That folks who have never had a baby, and folks who've never dealt with children and childbirth, folks who've never spent a lot of time thinking about it, contemplating it. Even to the extent that science can walk us through the fundamentals, right? There's real world, filmed in utero, not entirely sure how they did that, but they did. Not entirely sure how awkward and uncomfortable that must have been, but it's been done. Documentary footage of the entire process, and we can describe it to a relatively high degree of detail. It's one of the most beautiful, proofs. It's undeniable, right? You can't deny that the things that happen. You can choose to be willfully ignorant and say that it happened some other way other than the way that science describes it. But in material terms, it is as we understand it to be. And, in fact, science has taken some crazy sci-fi freaky fucking, potentially disastrous strides towards replicating the process. And I forget the term for out of utero, as in utero means in the uterus, right? In vitro, it means on the glass or in the glass. It's in like in a petri dish. But never mind the robots. Like, maybe the robots have been here for a long time and they're quietly, and this is scaring me a little bit because I've never thought about this, and I'm writing robot sci-fi, right? And this is now inherently, I own this thought because all of this, my podcast is woven into the fabric of the universe of my own literary works. It isn't currently on the page in any of the things that you see in Wattpad, but it is structurally a huge ingredient. So whatever I talk about on the podcast is inherently patented and rights protected as part of that creative output. What if the robots have been here for a really long time? Like, and I don't mean Matrix level, but you just get into a horrible feedback loop of hallway of mirrors fractalism of like, well, we could be 20 layers in and we be really hard to tell, what it is. Like I don't know if this is an existing accepted fan theory, but it's one of mine I've long had about the Matrix. What if everything that Neo and Morpheus and the gang and the tribes of Zion experience outside of the Matrix are just another part of the Matrix? Right? A hologram within a hologram within a hologram within a hologram within a hologram. A matrix within a matrix within a matrix within a matrix. But I digress. One of my new favorite memes I have found that I've just not yet posted. Harumph, I don't have it in front of me. I thought I would. I thought I did. Oh no, I turned it off. Turned that device off. In theory, to not hog bandwidth, but it's also, I have excellent bandwidth for the level at which we're operating. I put a pin in that. Well, don't put a pin in it. Pause. And I'll read you this meme in a hot second. Let me connect all this to Zen and why I think cannabis can Zen if you let it. Given the theoretical assertion that the statements in my meta thesis, many of which are not contained in this particular segment episode because I've rambled about them on other episodes and I'm to not bore you to tears, not including them here. If all that shit is true, if I'm not deluding myself, if I haven't spent a lifetime running down an engineered rabbit hole of bullshit, which I argue I don't think that I am, because phenomenological evidence is inherently part of the whole structure, then, therefore, cannabis is meant to be approached not as a party drug, but a spiritual ally, and arguably, as I've talked about before, I think in other episodes of Cannabis Talk, superfood. Put a pin in that subject. Because I'm looking at the clock, and we've been running on a bit. My vocal cords need a respite. A respite? They need a break, yo. The universe is alive. It might, and we are ourselves inseparable from it. We are not small, tiny, little, isolated individual beings, but rather we are an integral form and function that's part of reality itself. And if what Alan Watts says, one of the ingredients in my meta thesis here, which I've been trying to bring up, and I keep losing the thread, and that's that somewhere in his book, The Way of Zen, he says something that I've seen memeified that I shoulda, coulda, woulda already made my own meme of, and haven't yet. But he says, and I'm paraphrasing severely here. Excuse me, 1 second. Couldn't tell if it was a hiccup, a burp, or a cough, but everything was just like. Alan Watts says anything can be Zen, and that's me interpreting for you what he said. Anything can be Zen. Cannabis can Zen, especially once you are comfortable with thinking of Zen as not an ideological dictate. It's not dogma. It's a word that points to a very complicated and complex and nuanced collection of, not individual, but a cornucopia of phenomenological events in the universe that includes the singularity of phenomenological observation, right? At the center of your being, you are receiving whatever you are, to get really Zen about it. Whatever you are, at the center of your being, you're observing reality, and you are intrinsically, an expression of that same reality. Anything, what did Alan Watts say? Anything can be Zen. What he actually said is somewhere, I tried to look up the quote, and of course, he's said a lot of things. If you're not familiar with the massive body of work of Alan Watts, he spoke, he gave lectures, he released audio, recording albums, like Zen albums on vinyl, I think. And so there's a plethora of secondary derivative content based on all of his work by fans and enthusiasts that want to share his take on all of this. But here's the crux. Alan Watts is, in a passage I remember from his book, The Way of Zen, he was saying that any activity can be meditation if you do it just so, which is one of those super Zen-y terms, just so. I'm like, if you do it appropriately, anything can be meditation if you do it in a Zen way. Because Zen is not a set of ideologies or belief structures or tenets of dogma or articles of faith. They are fundamentally a building block collection of practices that are like training wheels to familiarize yourself with inherent, integral, biological, undeniable, undebunkable, experience-based phenomena that are part of your being alive, a part of your being, whatever the fuck this crazy experience of being in this ambulatory meat sack of blood and bone really is. Sidebar, as we continue to retract back to our main point, no one really knows any better than anybody else what is really going on, right? I'm not pretending to know something because some special source told it to me. I've come to these conclusions through my own willingness to contemplate the spectrum of theories readily available about the world, comparing and contrasting that with my own lived experience, both that naturally occurred to me without me trying to test any concept or theory or model inspired by my survey of cosmological models, and also in my experimental approach to test those boundaries. This podcast being one of those experimental activities. If anything can be meditation, and cannabis can Zen if you allow it, I posit to you, dear friends and audience, that we should cultivate intelligently, soberly, critically, thoughtfully, mindfully, Zenfully, a new cannabinoid cultural tool set, a new living practice, and that the foundational steps to achieving that as an ambitious and what's that word? Aspirational goal is rooted in the things we're already working towards as a community for those of us who are already advocates and enthusiasts of cannabis and hemp. And that's the full decriminalization at the 50 state level, at the federal level, the reclassification of it out of class 1A or A1 narcotic, and the opening up of a fair, just, well-balanced, well-representative mutually, not, something that builds a better community, set of industries and sciences focused on re-examining the human relationship with cannabis. Not just as a plant, but as a fellow life form. Not just cannabis. To get even more controversial, although it's not so fringy anymore, there's already plenty of effort being done. I can't take any credit for it. I'm just sort of vocally, publicly jumping onto the bandwagon. I'm a little late to this party. But psilocybin, that fun guy, there's something there. Don't take my word for it. Go brush up on your Terence McKenna. And instead of getting a scattershot take on Terence McKenna by going through whatever random short videos come up, go straight to the source. We Are Happy Plants, I believe it's called. This is a real, genuine, authentic, personal endorsement. I believe the channel on YouTube is We Are Happy Plants. Or it's either that or We Are Happy Plant People. Something along those lines. But put in Terence McKenna Happy Plants, and you should get to the channel I'm thinking of. And then go straight to either of the two most OG of OG documentaries created by, it's either Terence McKenna's brother or Terence McKenna's very close friend that was there back in the day. Insert name of that place they're here that's so iconic that I can't remember the name of right now. The people would be like, people who know would be like, yeah. But I know, but I can't, word file recall. That's a different problem than not knowing, right? I'm not ignorant. It's not that I don't know that there's a cool town that's got a cool last name in a country that's also pretty interesting and would be iconic to say. It's just that my brain can't pull that file card right now. I digress. These plants are here to facilitate vis-a-vis having a relationship with us as food and sacred healing potions? What's the right word for something you ingest that's more important than food? Potions. Sacred healing ally advocate tools. I don't know. We need to redefine, right? I'm a big supporter of cannabis culture. There's problematic issues. Dear cannabis culture friends, let us not turn a blind eye to them. There's problematic issues with the way the system of industry of gentrification and industrialization of everything is trying to create a new cannabis industry. But there's also problematic issues at the grassroots level with some of the shit that is considered okay, acceptable, and or cool. Put a pin in that. We'll talk about it in another episode. How could I summarize today's crossover segment? The living universe wants you to smoke and eat weed and explore, question, test, and verify whatever spiritual theory you want to investigate. Because it's not about proving my theory right. It's about re-examining them all again and questioning all the questions again and again and again and again in an infinite, intellectual fractal recursion of refining and rediscovering not just the theory, but a living practical modality. Let's reprioritize, friends. Let's reprioritize living practical modality over dogmatic religious ideology, over profiteering on corrupt science, over all the other things we could do. There's a reason why the human body evolved, why the human genome crafted and created the living human genome, right? Crafted and created a cannabinoid, an endocannabinoid system. And I assert to you, dear friends, that cannabis can, if you allow it, by approaching it with respect, coming at it right, like the kids say. Don't be coming at it wrong, the way the system of oppression wants to trick us into doing. The same goes for alcohol. The way we use it is toxic. We need to completely reevaluate and reexamine vis-a-vis the practical, metaphysical, spiritual, mystical lens of looking for a healthy, healing, uplifting, practical modality, a living practice. Because alcohol is not evil. There's nothing is an absolute monolith of anything. Everything is a mixed bag. Everything is a relativistic function that can either be a useful tool or a bloody horror show of a mess. Right? People have proven out there in the world that you can use cannabis wrong. People prove over and over again, all year round, and especially at the holidays, you can use alcohol destructively. And there is verifiable evidence that one can have a correct, accurate, righteous, that's a tricky word because it's loaded full of a lot of baggage thanks to organized religion, but, in the sense that it is right and true and in alignment with the most divine form and function possible. One of the logical conclusions, right, if all of this crazy stuff, taken all together, I keep adding and sprinkling in new layers, and from here on out, folks, new listeners and old, consider this podcast, not just a show about some dude rambling about stuff, but rather a sort of free-flowing, guided, improvised tour through the interconnected web of many different strands of this multiversal theory that you are invited not to blindly accept as something to believe in, but rather to entertain in the philosophical sense of that word, entertain in your thinky thought machine, because that can be meditation too. One of the more complex and difficult to connect the dots on sometimes without rambling at great length conclusions that one is potentially capable of arriving at, like I did, about this and, the very long set of answers with more questions that generate more answers and more questions about answering that question of, like, what is the point of life? What the fuck is really going on here? Is that maybe, just maybe, and this is central, this is crux at all to my entire thesis, my artwork, and the purpose of this journey on this podcast. Maybe, just maybe, the world being what it is, there is work, maybe, just maybe, because of the world being what it is, which is our fault, we created it, being our own selves, having always been each other, as consciousness is the root and ground of all being, and no matter how individuated you experience it, the Maya, the illusion, the physical realm of reality that's so real and yet so infinitely virtual that people think it's a computer program or a video game, or quote-unquote the Matrix. Sidebar, look up the original root meaning of the word Matrix. It isn't computer box. It's uterus. Divine, cosmic uterus. Maybe, just maybe, I make my sentences and my declarations so complicated because I keep thinking of things to wax poetic about. I apologize. That's not even a maybe. That's a solid yes. I need to do that. But here we go. Take 12 on whatever this particular little strand of thought is. Maybe, just maybe, there is work, real, meaningful, practical, pragmatic, living practices type work that doesn't have to be rigid and dogmatic, but rather can be invented like an art form, like someone getting experimental and wacky with yoga and inventing a new yoga art form, which I have a friend that does that actually. Shout out to my friend and her dance meditation stuff. Maybe there's a whole vast array of that we are not doing, that we can't even imagine, that especially, and I say this with love, not judgment, the normies, the quote-unquote sheeple that everyone's so busy judging, can't imagine. But that none of the judgers, the people I like to call the parrot people, busy being sheepily in their blind regurgitation of the current trendiest slam, diss, ugly troll fucking attempt to own whatever their favorite oppositional sheeple person might be. But what, fundamentally lacking real critical thinking. Can't imagine, because they're just repeating the garbage that everyone else is repeating, right? What most people, what the plurality of people, no matter how enlightened, no matter how spiritual, no matter how awake, even Sadhguru, maybe insert your favorite, let me put it this way. And I'm not, I know I ride a weird controversial through line. I consider myself to be a spiritual being that has a living relationship with Christ. Most Christians of whatever ilk, whatever variety, from whatever camp, they probably have a hard time, if they didn't know that I was raised in a Christian tradition, welcoming me, coming to the conclusion that they would accept me as a Christian. But that's neither here nor there. Imagine it from that perspective, right? From the Christ consciousness, Christ being, not as an individual that's going to come back and rule over us like a king and punish the bad people and reward the good people, which is really, come on. He said, the kingdom of heaven is inside, not out there. Don't wait for me to return. Be the Gnosis, be the Christ. I also sort of lost my thread there. Where was I going? Don't take this as an article of faith, like phenomenological. This is all verifiable, right? The things that I'm pointing to, the consciousness as ground of being, isn't some erudite ideological dogma. It's something, what I'm saying is, consider that Christ, as many philosophers and traditional Christians point out, Catholics, whatever, Christ taught people ways to be. He did not teach dogma to buy into. In fact, he tended to troll the Pharisees for being all about the dogma and not about the healing acts. There's admonitions about it all the time, right? Faith without action is dead, etc. And he even literally talks about third eye, pineal gland stuff. Christ, here's the thought that I lost that's back to me. Christ, I would posit to you, I have no way of proving this, I just feel it in my bones, that whoever the person was, and I suspect that his wife, whoever she was, deserves equal credit. Because whenever two or more, gather, the Spirit flows. I would suspect that them, or the Buddhas, or whatever individuals... Hold on, there's a cough coming up. They were the Christ himself, the Buddha himself, their female partners that I highly suspect were there, but we erased from history. The real people, not the ideological versions of them, not the comic book versions of them. You'll hear me use that term. Not the comic book version of Jesus. This is what I mean. There's the stories that we tell, and then there's whoever actually lived that experience. We don't know what that was really like, but we can speculate based on the evidence that has survived. I would posit to you, based on my lifetime of quote-unquote knowing Christ, that the Christ himself, and the Christ isn't the individual human being, it's the spiritual grace empowered and activated through them, right? So whatever Buddhas have been throughout the eons of lost history, they were all gifted with a new functional modality to bear witness as evidence themselves of the evolutionary potential of human beings, and that in living that, so a way to put it prosaically, is that the right way to put it? Oh, there's a word I want to use, but I'm not remembering it exactly. To put it, to make an analogy to what I'm saying, what Jesus was preaching was not a set of ideas, not a set of laws, not a set of rules or judgment or any of that. He was teaching us the fundamental yoga practices, not because he was a yogini, but he probably was, but because there's these natural phenomenological activities that are transcendental in nature that we could be creating art with, that is divine, sacred, spiritual in its form and function, but we've been neglecting it for a very long time. And that each of them, even in their moment of being the golden shining example, the golden one, the divine one, the inspired one, the Buddha one, the Christ, the Neo, they were probably aware of their inability to express how much more work there is to do that we can't even begin to comprehend. That we're not even ready to do yet. Because we've got to engage with these fundamentals the way you wouldn't enter yourself in Olympic lifting contest without years of bodybuilding training and building up the capacity to lift those good gnarly weights, right? I could be wrong. But I think that's, if there's an answer to what the fuck is going on here, and is there a calling, it might be that. And that tools like meditating with cannabis, meditating with mushrooms, facilitate us in getting to those biological awareness levels to come to the organic realizations of oh shit. It's like someone who knows they should be doing yoga every morning and hasn't been doing it for 150 years, wakes up one day with a horrible crick in the neck and is grumpy and complaining about it and go, oh God, I can't move my neck, I can't swivel, I can't turn, I can't look up, why is that? Oh, right. For 150 years I haven't been doing yoga. Shit. Let's do yoga. To put it another way, and I'll wrap the show up here, and I don't think this is literal, this is spiritual analogy. The enlightened ones, like Yeshua and Buddha and the rest, if they represent the next available evolutionary, spiritual evolutionary, might be more technically accurate, the next energetic, physical, spiritual, transcendental, quantum mechanical, evolutionary, butterfly phase that humanity can achieve, but is being a stubborn little toddler about not doing the effort, the work required to achieve it. That is that moment, that ascension. And no, I don't think anyone running around on the internet claiming to have achieved ascension has actually achieved ascension. Not in the technical sense that I'm trying to describe here, based on lifetime of investigation. But that if there is a real thing that we might describe as enlightenment or ascension, that is akin to graduating from kindergarten into first grade. Then we have second grade and third grade and fourth grade, and then we finish elementary school, and then we graduate, and there's high school. Now, of course, I'm being silly and ridiculous for humor and for dramatic emphasis. And I don't know, but I suspect that it might be fractal layers and sets of 3 because reasons. But I think, allegorically, it's spot on. The human species is an overgrown, ego-infested, deeply traumatized toddler, cosmologically speaking. The human species has not learned, and I remove myself to speak objectively. Don't get butthurt about it. Don't get all like, oh, you're ganging up on all of us, huh? No, just hear me out. The human species has not, as a collective, truly, deeply, fully learned the lessons that this kindergarten level classroom confronts us with to learn. We're being stubborn. We're throwing a tantrum. We're kicking and screaming on the floor because we don't want to share. We don't want to learn how to heal ourselves and each other. And we don't want to stop butchering ourselves and the planet for money. And we will not graduate into first grade of elementary school and progress through whatever unimaginable things must be going on there, because they're all happening concurrently and simultaneously in an infinite, multiversal, impossible to describe fractal that is infinitely unfolding. But even though they're all happening concurrently and simultaneously at all times, because time is only a perceptual illusion, we also have choice. We have the freedom to choose how we traverse, what actions we take during the traverse of that perceived time, right? And we need to stop ourselves from indulging in a new level of frenetic, blind rage tantruming, because we're teeter-tottering right now, folks. We can get our shit together and start organizing ourselves and the world we share around principles established on undeniable phenomenological experiences that transcend the petty squabbles of all other ideological cults. No offense. We can spare and salvage all the good shit. Don't get me wrong. I don't think that all of culture is a monolith of evil, right? I'm not that naive. But we need to attenuate and activate the experience of having this, of exploring and testing and having this phenomenological experience that debunks all other ideology. Because then we're ready to actually attend kindergarten and learn the lessons that we're supposed to learn here. And after we go through all of that effort, we can graduate into becoming whatever the fuck the Buddha and the Christ and the rest of them all, their names always escape me right there. There's a huge list. And it's easy to say, oh, they're all made up, they're all lies, they might as well be comic book superheroes. But science has somehow stumbled into the evidence that supports each of their various cultural claims. Science can now detect the subtle energies of the body that flow in ley lines and converge in various vortices. Right? Science can now confirm that, oh shit, yep, the heart does generate an electromagnetic toroidal waveform that, as subtle as it is a constant standing waveform hologram, right? It's a functional, whatever the fuck our heart is doing, which we don't even understand, right? Have your mind blown by this. Do you understand how you grow your hair, how you grow your teeth and nails? No, of course you don't. And if you attempted to try and define that sentence by sentence, you'll go mad with how it happens anyways without you having ever tried to understand it. And when you try to understand it, you get to a point where it's I still don't understand how it happens, because at Planck length, it's all void, waving everything else that we could describe into existence. And yet here it is, and yet here we are. Now imagine the kind of society we could manifest together if we healed ourselves and each other vis-a-vis the craziness I just said. Not because I'm a crazy person shouting on a street corner. Not because I'm some guru with 20 books, which I don't. I wish I did. I wish I'd written 20 books already. I could have. All the stuff I can't stop thinking about in my head. But I'm a collaborative writer doomed to never quite get where I want to be until I finally attract that soul tribe of fellow artists that want to jump on this and make their art and my art and our art. But that's a whole discussion for another day, folks. If the universe is a living hologram infinitely unfolding, then yes, we have always been each other and the individuals that we feel trapped inside of. And there must be organic, naturally occurring, hitherto undescribed or poorly described or vastly misunderstood and misinterpreted phenomenological, spiritual, crazy shit, to get comical about it, right? Undeniable, undebunkable, measurable, verifiable, repeatable spiritual phenomena that is the long neglected birthright, not of one special individual. Here's the only place I get kind of absolutist about my statements. I think it's the species birthright. The whole species, gets there or we don't get there. And it's not because it's the species is special, because why? The world's a fractal, self-referencing, manifesting dream machine that creates everything it creates through this kaleidoscopic orgasm of ever more complicated layers of complexity. And life, all caps life, is the divine designer thing we call God, the architect, the yin and the yang of the chaotic churning that unfolds it all. And that is inseparable from that which is the thing at the center of your awareness that you say, I am about. Right? As one of the oldest memes I ever made, the thing at the center of your mind that you call you is the thing that we collectively call, quote unquote, God. You aren't God. God is you. And if we understood that, if we knew that, if we lived that, if we communed with that, how different the world could be. If that isn't the calling, I don't know what else is. And I don't want to try no other call, because that call makes sense. The calling to investigate and live through that phenomenological work. Do the steps, work the steps, like they say in AA, to get to basic zero-level Christ consciousness, let's call it entry-level Christ consciousness, to get our Hogwarts invitation to whatever the fuck the elementary school of being a divine cosmic being of pure conscious living light that can also occasionally, when need be, manifest in transcendental physical reality. Because if that doesn't fix the petty ass bullshit that everyone's so caught up in arguing and fighting and butchering each other about, I don't know what else might. But it's the thing that makes the most sense as probably having a pretty decent shot at actually going, click, your basic human problems fixed. And it's not going to be. I don't pretend to think it's easy. I don't pretend to think it's. I do think it might be eventually inevitable. the way, if we do understand the universe, the physical aspects of the universe, as well as we think we do in the real science that isn't nonsensical and corrupt, then, it is inevitable that our beautiful and beloved sun will one day come to a terminus point, a point of no longer functioning. Because the sun's not an object. It is an endless procedural form of function. And it too will one day extinguish that activity. Terence McKenna thinks that the true, if I may interpret his words, I could be wrong. This may be a misinterpretation of Terence McKenna, but I think, based on the years of contemplating the stuff the wool I've gathered from reading and listening and watching his stuff, I think that the object at the end of the universe, is that what he calls it? He calls it there's a thing at the end of the universe, which he believes is what the future is, right? Like the future inevitably can only be described as the end of the universe. And that's not the end of all things. It's just the end of whatever this procedure is, whatever this process is, as we are one little minuscule ingredient in it, capable of understanding it, right? Reference here my my analogy about being, a small flora, fauna, microbial organism in the appendix. I won't go on that rabbit hole. But he says that the reason it's inevitable is because although our description and our conditioning of it doesn't let us perceive it clearly enough to know it innately, the world, the universe et al. Is functioning from a place of being attracted to that which is the object at the end of the universe. It is pulling us there, not the other way around. The past isn't cause and effect. It's attractor attracted. And cause and effect is a way to describe the linkage between the dots that we phenomenologically experience in the mundane material world day to day. The stuff, the collection of the series of events that we think we perceive because we have so many shutters closed that we can only perceive time in a sort of incremental slice by slice way. So we've created this useful delusion that time flows from the past into the present, through it out towards the future. But arguably, it is the great attractor at the end of the universe, this singularity of all that can be brought together into a singularity that is pulling the entirety of that which can be called loci of experience, right? The entire collection of phenomenological body avatars, whether they're fish, you, me, other talking spacefaring species, whatevs. Whether we're talking about you, or the you in the next alternate universe over where you have red hair instead of blonde hair by birth, or where you married the first girl you had a crush on instead of whoever you married, or whatever, right? Because it's an infinite branching of branching of branching of branching of branching. That stuff is all being pulled into ever-increasing layers of complexity until the complexity becomes so complex that it collapses into a singularity of consciousness. That's my interpretation of what I understand Terence McKenna to be attempting to describe his apparently well-informed English narrative model of a cosmology, of what the fuck is actually going on. Now, I don't pretend, let's end the show on this, friends, I don't pretend to know 100%. I have my moments when I speak of this with confidence and enthusiasm, because doubt is not riddling me with bullets of the mind. But I have my moments, I have my days, I have my weeks when I doubt the living shit out of all of this. And I feel like a corpse on the floor bleeding out, right? From those paper bullets of the mind, to get a little steampunk Shakespearean. Some gun punks Shakespearean. Why do I think this matters? If one could describe, if then, we're having nested, layered if-then statements, right? This is the meta one, which we'll conclude on the show. If everything we've just talked about is pointing in the right direction towards the truth about how the universe works and operates, then it is within our grasp as a species to achieve species-wide activation of a transcendental, third eye opening, metaphysically healing, evolutionary transition, metamorphosis into whatever it means to be living in full Christ consciousness, entry level Christ consciousness. Not because this church or that church, but because it is the inevitable exploration of the infinity of possibilities, and we can do that, or, thanks to free will, we can keep riding around this man-made merry-go-round meat grinder of profiting on the subjugation and limitation to the mundane, material, false ideological construct that we are just these body avatars, and that we cannot solve the system and its horror shit show of profiteering, right? We can stop. We can literally transform and transmute and therefore transcend and eradicate, but not in a destruction way, but in a healing way, the merry-go meat grinder of profiteering on life and death that is the ego-driven system of oppression behind and responsible for all the injustices in the world that people create conspiracy theories about, and all the injustices in the world that we face without conspiracy theory, right? Not because I say so, but because an evolutionary leap to Christ consciousness, which is the birthright not just of the human species, but arguably, since everything is one, inseparable, holographic fractal consciousness being infinitely unfolding, it's inescapable that the truth must be that it is birthright, that achieving Christ consciousness is the birthright of all that can be described as life, all caps life. Don't take my word for it. Challenge yourself this year. Join me on a journey of experimental meditative podcasting talk radio. Namaste, friends and interweb fam. That's this episode for today. Let's play out one last little bit of DJ Zed music. One that isn't too horribly long. Have I already played that one before? Where's a nice tight one? a hip-hop hook, groove, pad, live-to-tape audio electronic jam performance entitled Ripped Open It Flows by my favorite sidekick, DJ Z. Take a moment to stew in all the wild, trippy, mind-blowing things we've just been talking about. Thank you and namaste, friends. So, I'll leave you with a final thought, a bit of practical, pragmatic, pro advice. You're hearing me out. You're like, okay, cool, dude, cool. Cannabis isn't a party drug, all right, I get it. How do I, someone who's never smoked cannabis, or, of course, conversely, how do I, someone who's partied with cannabis and has never really thought about it in a spiritual context, how do I engage with it spiritually? My first thing, it's going to sound cheesy, man, but it's couched in a broader subject, which we should put a pin up on the board for. I don't remember if I've called it out before, but it's central to everything. And there's so many things central to everything, but they spiral together into a very tightly woven thing. And that's that, like, language, thought, spelling, it's a spell, magic. You know, you've probably seen the memes. Careful what you think about, right? So my first bit of advice for those who want to turn a new leaf is to acknowledge and honor the plant as a vessel of consciousness and talk to it silently in your head, probably. I mean, especially out the store, at the dispensary, or like, you know. But talk to it. Talk to it the way you might imagine a child with a really vivid imagination speaks to an imaginary friend. But don't impose unnecessary expectations. Just talk to it like someone, like you're meeting someone and you're getting to know them. Talk to it and thank it when you get home from the dispensary. Talk to it when you're getting ready to set up the first bowl and you're excited. Talk to it the way you talk to your cat. And even if you don't have a cat, you get what I'm saying, right? Talk to it like you know it is a spiritual entity, not a pet. And I think a lot of people who own cats, realize that that's how they should and they do talk to their cats like that. And they don't own the cats. The cats have laid claim to them. Talk to them the way you would talk to, the way you imagine someone who talks to their houseplants who thinks that they can understand them, right? Talk to them like you think you can understand, just whether you think it's stupid sounding or not. Accept that the plants can understand you and talk to them. Now, here's why I think this is valid. It works with yourself. We think of ourselves as the voices in our heads, but we're more than that. Whether you only have one voice, some people have no inner monologue, right? Which can be shocking to realize, what? From either side of the fence. All human beings are capable of functioning with minimal to zero inner monologue. Most people in this postmodern near-dystopian society are kind of a little addicted to inner monologue, the way people are addicted to their phones. It's the first thing we invented because it's a device. It's a system we crafted in our minds language, right? It's a tool. So some people are stoic and do very little inner monologuing, and that's fine. There's nothing to judge there. Some people are a little addicted to the inner monologue voice, especially if they have a vivid imagination and they can render multiple voices. That doesn't mean you're crazy necessarily. Now, there is dysfunction there that gets problematic, and then you get into the realm of diagnosable, things. But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm just talking about having a lucid, vivid imagination and being able to think in yourself, to yourself, with yourself, right? Plenty of people are aware, although to some people this is a shock surprise, that you can think without words. You can come to understanding and then have to sort of struggle to find the right words for it. But you know the thing. Okay, so here's where this is meaningful. We are, as I've said before on the podcast, on occasion here, we are, the human body is, let's be correct, let's be really specific. The human body is a transducing spiritual conduit. The mind, your mind, inclusive of your personality and your personal narrative, they don't originate in the meat sack. They are rendered vis-a-vis an ongoing, fractally constructed interface process. The body brings awareness in and of itself. The body avatar, the animal that we are, right? The lizard brain. We kind of acknowledge it in our sort of joking rhetoric about physiology, but we don't really deeply understand it. The body has a mind of its own, and it has multiple minds of its own. For those of you who know the struggle between the mind, the heart, and the stomach, the body is a vessel for consciousness, which is made up of what? Cells. And if each cell is a living constituent of your body, and your body is a recursive droplet of the infinite fractal unfolding, then each cell is a droplet of the same, an infinite fractal unfolding, therefore a vessel of consciousness. The body avatar has its own locations of conscious awareness distributed throughout the body. And there are other layers, right? And you are composed, you are a multifaceted being comprised of a collection of phenomena, physical and intangible, right? As another, I believe it's Alan Watts, although it might be a different scientist of science. Someone pointed out in a beautiful quote about how, like, in the human body, there are living organisms that are not made up, that do not have human genome in them, that have separate genomic material, that are engaged in a dynamic relationship and predate on each other, right? There's things inside of you that live and eat other things that are inside of you. And they're not, to the extent that, as we know ourselves in postmodern times, they're not a toxic, unnecessary, negative, invasive culture of living organisms. They facilitate life and the function of your body, and you would be unhealthy without them. The flora and fauna in your gut are the easiest example. People are commonly, familiar with that. What are they called? There's another word for it that I like. The probiotics, right? But your very tissues and cells function in the same way. That being said, I spiraled way out of control because I was trying to leave you with some practical, pragmatic suggestions for how to approach cannabis from this perspective that I'm enthusiastically advocating. To go and explore for yourself. Some examples should be obvious. Create a small ritual for yourself. Start by creating a conscious, acknowledged, spiritual, intellectual, emotional, energetic, linguistic, and physical relationship with cannabis. Honor it. Thank it as you prepare to consume it. And if you've never smoked and you're curious and interested in your approaching this, and here's my final bit of advice to wrap up the show, always know your local rules and regulations. I don't know where you're listening to this from. If you're listening to this from a country where cannabis is illegal, don't get in trouble. Don't get me in trouble. And organize, and build community to get your municipality to recognize it as something that needs to be decriminalized, right? Okay, so all of that's always stipulated. Please, this is a podcast that exists on the internet. Please, you are responsible for yourself and in knowing your own laws and regulations. And if they're not up to snuff in terms of, then think about them from this spiritual perspective that we're engaged in discussing, then organize around these spiritual perspectives and upgrade those legislations in your municipalities. But in terms of practical approaches, right, if you're new to smoking pot, having said all that about knowing what the fuck, where you are, and don't get yourself in fucking trouble, build that basic, simple ritual of saying something like, and it can be worded in any way. And if you come from a Christian tradition, talk about it in Christ-like terms. Arguably, cannabis is in the Bible. I think I've already done plenty of talking about that in past episodes. Enjoy discovering that content. And if you're new to cannabis, microdose. I've learned from my own experimentation and witnessing others and anecdotal stories from others, you never want to try to keep up with anybody else. Fuck that. That's toxic barroom brawl thinking, right? Like that's alcoholic thinking. Trying to drink to keep up with people. No. Microdose and test to your comfort zone. And, approach it with respect, talk to it, and have a conversation with it. And yeah, you know what? Some people would say, and would stop and draw a line here and say, like, don't try to feed it yourself dialogue for it. But I would say, yeah, fuck it, why not? Play around. I'm not trying to tell you that weed is suddenly going to fucking start talking to you. And I really, really doubt that you're going to hallucinate some sort of weed, cannabis spirit image. Now, there is something that does happen that I think is separate and different from hallucination. And that's that under the right conditions, this doesn't happen all the time, but under the right conditions, cannabis hyperactivates whatever you call the daydreaming function of our minds and brains. And have you ever been sitting on a park bench on a beautiful day with nothing to do and nothing to think about and started thinking about something you're projecting into the future or something you're recalling from the past and get caught up in a really vivid, lucid, visual experience that blocks out temporarily in a sort of visual overlay, but it gets so intense that you really don't recognize what's going on right in front of you kind of way, the world around you, right? This happens while driving because, you can get lulled into that zone easily. While driving, stay on the lookout for that. Hard learned lesson, driving and meditating at the same time is a little bit not, it's not the best idea. It gets a little risky. Although mindfulness and bringing your Zen state into your living everyday life is arguably, quote unquote, the goal, even though there are no goals, right? Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Put a pin in that. We've talked about that at length. Where are we? I was trying to wrap up the show and we're still rattling and it's crazy. I ramble out of control, folks. Thanks for putting up with it. Oh yeah, simple little things. Just turn smoking cannabis. I mean, most people, traditionally, cannabis in the United States of America, in the cultural traditions I was introduced, cannabis is done socially, sitting around in a circle with a group of friends, or individually for the purposes of relaxation, right? And as Alan Watts reminds us, anything can be meditation. And as I'm here to add to that, cannabis can make anything zen. Cannabis will zen if you allow it. So choose your set and setting, and put a pin in that because we've talked about that at length in cannabis episodes before, I think, and we probably will again. And it's an important thing if you're so new to cannabis or entheogenics or quote-unquote drugs, and I hate that word, because plants that grow out of the ground and consumed without technical processing aren't drugs. They're fucking food, in my humble opinion, and organic, naturally occurring medicine. And of course, spiritual fucking vessels of consciousness and allies in our journey through this kaleidoscope maze of Maya. Maya, by the way, is specific, right? It's the shimmer of illusion that is the material world. But choose a simple activity. You can, smoke a little weed. You know what? Instead of, and now I'm going to get some people might think it's hypocritical or that I'm doubling back on something or that I'm flip-flopping. I usually am disgusted by others' use of, or kind of engrossed when it comes out in my own, the comparison of cannabis to alcohol. But, especially booze, alcohol cliches, or bar culture, drinking. And I say that as a former social drinker that loved bars and the scene, right? But set that aside and think of it the way yoga wino moms, yoga wine moms. I didn't want to say wino, but I'm a little, it's like you're flirting with disaster there because alcohol ultimately is very dehydrating to you. So exercise and alcohol should not be mixed too close together in the day, sequentially and time-wise. Bad, you just, or in the week. You really need your body to process things on a 24-hour, 48-hour, 72-hour time frame before you can, But also, but from that cliche, the yoga wine moms, Like, they're not drinking to get blackout drunk and puke, at the punk rock club. They're drinking to cut that edge and get to that delicious place that makes the chocolate taste better and the Netflix and chill more sexy and fun, right? Let's not let Netflix and chill get controversial. We mean that in the wholesomest way, but yeah, maybe a little sexy too. Because, dun dun dun, breaking news, sex and tantra, it's all spiritual. But people are doing it wrong. Put a pin in that, do another episode. But it's relevant here because there's a whole book, or probably triptych of books, that I want to write, can't write until I find my special person. I'm not a big fan of the twin flame language, but I like the nerdly cultural word of like, I just got to find my person, it's my person. That person and I need to write a book about couples meditation. And there's totally several chapters in there about the beautiful Venn diagram of convergence between meditation, naughty yoga, naughty massage, tantric sex and tantric orgasms for women, and couples therapy and healing, cannabis, and spiritual practices that we are missing out on in terms of like we could be exploring. There's so much healing there when done correctly. One of the reasons we're in the messes, the cornucopia of a cacophony of shitstorm of disaster that we're in terms of all the cultural level problems, is because we have not honored and respected all of these things that we're talking about. We haven't honored and respected our food, right? As a person who's been saying for decades, I strongly suspect that plants are alive. Vegans and vegetarians go effing postal, figuratively, not literally, right? They get triggered AF at me because they went vegans for the animals because the animals suffer because being eaten is scary and sucks. But now we're doing the exact same thing to the plants. And if we acknowledge that plants have consciousness, well, woe is me, what the fuck do we eat? Life has always eaten each other. Is there a solution to that problem? Well, before we really integrated transcendental thinking, we thought the solution was to subjugate all other life. If we're really honest about it, we are food pyramid, food web tyrants. And that's a whole conversation humanity ain't ready for, right? Because we've ideologified, we've sports politicized everything, including diet, including how we think about our role in the world, including evolutionary history. So it's like there's too much noise to cut through. But think on that, dear friends. What we did when we butchered everything that ate us out of existence, or genetically engineered through livestock breeding manipulation we didn't need to do it high tech, we did it low tech, so that it was docile enough that we could, it was tyranny. Why is human society apparently always on the brink of disastrous tyrannical uprising and takeover? Because the human species has been behaving in a tyrannical fashion to the entire network of life. The brotherhood and sisterhood of life here on this living effing uterus. And we need to stop that malarkey, friends. Wait, I went far afield. Because I was trying to describe simple, pragmatic things you can do to approach cannabis from a spiritual location. All the things I already said, talk to it, take time to make spiritual space with it. recognize that the things you feel, right, and the things that you feel inside your body when you consume cannabis and the various ways that you can consume cannabis and CBD, by the way, they go together. Lots of strains. The industry culture has been to strains to push the extreme polarization of CBD and THC. We need to normalize breeding strains for a balanced approach and to get a nuanced understanding of the interplay, because they all work together. It's a system of cannabinoidal chemicals. But anyways, talk to your weed, right? If you live in a place that lets you grow it legally, either through a medical card or because they finally, the state has said it's recreationally legal, grow weed. Don't grow too much weed that you're in violation of your laws, but grow weed like a house plant, like it's tomatoes, and talk to them and learn from them and pay attention to them and smoke it. Know your limits. Realize that there really is a serious and authentic learning curve, and we can spend hours talking about that, friends. I've lived through it. But that even microdosing, and you can do incremental microdosing, which is fun, which you should do safe setting. Don't go jumping into your car 10 minutes later, etc. And just sit with music, without music. Go for a walk. Especially if you're in a nice, safe neighborhood and it's not the middle of the night. Don't go for a walk in the middle of the night and you're not in a nice, safe neighborhood. But ultimately, sit with the experience at a phenomenological level and kick the ridiculous, cheesy habit of saying, "Dude, I'm so high. Dude, I'm so high." That's like noob level. -0.0, like I don't even know how to describe it. Like, get past that shit. And ask, here's the trick. Ask, people say, "Oh, I can't control my brain, I can't control, it won't shut up." Forgive it and ask it nicely, like it's, a toddler with a toothache, but, a very advanced vocabulary. And nurture yourself. Apply that like bubble bath, yoga, mom, wine, self-care philosophy, but do it with cannabis. Do it with cannabis. If you're already well versed in that like wine is self-care philosophy, and you're a responsible wine drinker and you're not a total wino, because it is a spectrum, slippery slope, be careful, then you can apply the same sort of philosophy to cannabis. And you can combine the two, but know your limits and take it wicked easy, and be sure to hydrate first. That's a whole nother issue. We can do a whole series of episodes on like the appropriate way to get crossfaded and inappropriate ways to get crossfaded. But that's not the point of today's episode, friends. Tread lightly and with respect, and cannabis will help you unpack the tightly wound, neurotic bundle of different centers of awareness that your being, your complex, multifaceted being really is. If you haven't already discovered that your body has its own awareness and its own attitude and its own way to communicate with you, you will. And then you and your body are going to have a talk. Trust me, I know. And the different aspects and facets of your mind are there. And that this, dear friends, is sacred. This is divine. It should not be confused with the chemical imbalances that science is accurately proposing are problematic, but we should also revisit our understanding of said quote-unquote diseases. But I digress. I always have way too many thoughts all at once, friends. You know why? Because I ask the universe to speak through me for your audio entertainment. Thanks for tuning in. I am your humble host, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo, and the music today has been brought to you by DJ Z, your favorite literary, fictional, animatronic robot DJ from a parallel universe not too far between here and the one I come from. He is tragically not the person playing the maple leaf or cannabis leaf rag. That is a bit of music, as I have disclaimed before and will again, I'm sure, that I found on freemusicarchive.org. Thank you for your audience-ship. Creator and audience is a spiritual relationship, friends. You're not just listening to a podcast. You're participating in a creative, collaborative experiment in cannabinoidal, social, spiritual, public discourse. And your participation is not just welcome, friends, it is thoroughly encouraged. Until next time, may peace, love, and grooviness blossom in your hearts. And that was the wrong bit of audio. Here's the right one. Well, folks, that bowl is cashed and dusted. Thank you for joining me for yet another most excellent session of Cannabis Talk. Stay lit, pay it forward, and remember, the world needs healing, and cannabis heals. Until next time, I have been your spiritual cannabis mystic talk show host, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo. You know, human beings have a propensity for muttering to themselves. As my old and very dear friend of mine used to say, I mean, I guess he still says it, I don't know. He would say, after a good, solid coughing fit, he would, kudos himself. He'd pat himself on the back and say something like, yeah, way to get it in there. And I would ask him I asked him once, after a while of watching him do that, what is that about, man? And he responded, when you're coughing, it's like the opposite of when you're coughing because of cigarettes. When you have a smoker's cough, you're hacking out your lung because it's all gross and nasty and dying from the tar. When you've got the cannabis cough, you're getting the healing nutrients, CBDs and THCs, from the cannabis smoke deeper in your lungs, which is helping to push out and clean all the gross, nasty shit. So that cough is healing. It's the healing cough. Of course, I am severely paraphrasing him, and he was, at the time of that conversation, we were both extremely high. But I digress. A little bonus material for the next Cannabis Talk episode. Okay. And now for the outro. I keep forgetting that's there. Anyways, the outro is, people have a propensity for muttering to themselves. And another little Zen practice that you can just implement is to, when you catch yourself muttering to yourself, don't judge it. Don't think, oh, what am I crazy? Why am I talking to myself out loud? Sit with it and enter into mindfulness and realize that you are speaking with divine consciousness. That our life itself is a conversation with God. Right? Even in the most boring parts, the most detailed, no, not detailed, the most tedious and seemingly insignificant moments, days, weeks, whatever, all of it, the very phenomena, the very just sitting there being alive is a conversation between that which we call God, the root source of all that exists, the creative seed that grows into everything in creation, and ourselves, the end point, one of the flowers on the stems of the tree of life.